Hey Instagram family, so I'm being interviewed live. Well, you're watching me live, and I'm being interviewed. And the Poetry.LA, do you want to say like a little?
When you were a child or a young woman, your mother told you one day you have some Indian in you, some French, some German, and a little bit of black.
Yes.
How was your first reaction to that information?
Confusion. It was like, what? But you're a kid, right? And so your parent, your mom is telling you that you have these ethnicities, and then 2 or 3 of those folks I didn't see at the family reunions because we were always labeled Black. So for her to give us the oral history, that oral narrative, that became a part of my fabric, of my identity.
Yeah.
But what I had to put on the filling out applications and documents, going to the doctor's office. I actually remember one time going to the doctor's office and my mom looking at the form and saying to the woman, "There's no place on here for mixed," and so my mom wrote her own box and wrote human.
Oh wow!
Right. So that's how she saw herself. But I think she probably was going through a bit of an identity crisis as well.
Yeah.
And so how do you translate that to your kids? So she told us. I was curious. She told us. People always ask me, like, what, you've got that good Indian hair. And so I grew up with that as a mantra as well. Good Indian hair, good Indian hair. And I was like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Yeah.
So let's fast forward from that moment, there's a lot of fast forward, to 2012, when you published the poetry book, Who's Afraid of Black Indians? And I want to focus a little bit on the word afraid, because in a recent interview you say that, and this was very shocking to me, you said that American Indian women are the most murdered in our country. And also Black women are more likely to die from an abuse partner than other women, twice as likely. So from that moment when your mother tells you you are Indian, you are French, you are German, you are Black, to this book, to Who's Afraid of Black Indians, what's the immediate motivation behind this book?
So the motivation behind my first book of poetry, Who's Afraid of Black Indians, was I wanted to make sense of the stories of my family. I wanted to make sense of the biraciality and the tri-raciality, but I also wanted to make sense of the violence in my family and what it meant to kind of grow up in this as a child, and just things happening or fights or even if I wasn't in the location of the fight, and then you hear that something happened, I was like, what is happening? Why is this happening? I think in the writing of these poems, I from Who's Afraid of Black Indians and the memoir as well, I was confronting the fear in myself. I was confronting the fear of society for mixed bloods. I was also trying to unearth kind of a cultural imagining of the mixed blood, and then the erasure of the mixed blood as well. Historically, my gosh, you can pinpoint so many moments in history where African Americans and American Indians have come together to fight, or to make babies, or the first actual insurrection. I'm going to get historical right now, but the first intersection was 1505 in Hispaniola, when the indigenous people came to the plantation of one of the Spanish governors and stole the slaves, the Black slaves, and took them back, to their homes. So there have been so many times when we've come together as people of color, for resilience purposes, for protection purposes, right? So I saw that in my family, and I saw it in society. And I said, but who's telling the story? So I wanted to tell that story, and also of survival.
Why don't you read the opening poem of Who's Afraid of Black Indians?
Okay. So in my tradition, in my walk, they say when you sing, you're praying twice in the sweat lodge, right? So all of my work I consider prayers. So I start with a song even when I'm reading. you knew my true name, wouldn't you want to take me there? Black Indians. All my journeys begin in North Carolina without my knowing it. Black Indians pushed like September crab shells on an angry winter shore, swept up in the storm of Moby Dick's adventure. The literature of us wiped and creamed against an outcrop of colonizing. Rocks, our acorn, our buckskin, our dreaming crushed, no corrected. Under the weight of change, we became husks of ourselves. We were Nusiyuk fading into Kehari ghosts on a riverbank. We were red-black wolves chewing our wrists from the arm. We fought next to the Tuscarora, beating ourselves into a story of lush rivers and swampland and defeat, unaware of the coming. Saddles and horses and silver in white mouths, sweeping us up in their fingers like dust in the corner of black powder pouches. We ran. My family escaped from that swampland in Sampson County into Tennessee, then to Indiana, and then Michigan. Indian, mulatto, colored, black. What were we? We planted ourselves next to the Potawatomi and the Odawa like corn stalks, and we grew into a farmhouse on fire.
You were born in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Yes.
Did you move to Los Angeles when you were 18? Is that correct?
I did.
Okay.
I moved to Los Angeles on October 17th in 1987, the day of a major earthquake, the day. And so I don't know, my ancestors were like, we're still here. Like, you can't escape Michigan. We're with you. So, yeah.
And then in 1991, you went to for the first time, you went to the world stage.
Yes.
in Leimert Park.
Yes.
It's a space that was founded by Kamau Daoud,
Yes.
and also by a musician, Billy Higgins.
Yes, the most recorded jazz drummer in the world. Yeah. Yes.
When you went to the world stage, it was a year old.
Yes, it was.
It was a year old.
Gosh, I was young when I first started going there, so I probably wrote a lot of bad poetry. and then so in the writing workshop, the Anansi Writers Workshop that happened on Wednesday night religiously, which is something that Michael Datcher, who is now at LMU, founded. So, and I have to say too that Michael Datcher brought all of these Berkeley people too. So you kind of had the Berkeley energy coming in, all these poets coming from June Jordan's workshop. Oh my gosh, June Jordan's Poetry for the People. Right? So you had all this like influx of energy, and suddenly one of my friends, Ruth Foreman, said, this is a renaissance. Like, this is a rebirth of language. You know, here we are, we're writing poetry, we're testifying to our lives, expressing ourselves in the best way that we can. But for some reason, we were at the apex, like we were all there. Right, just there, existing and growing.
In the year 2006, I believe, you orchestrated and edited this anthology, Voices from Leimert Park, and there are 2 volumes. This is from 2006.
This is 2006.
There is one in 2016 or 17.
Yes.
So in this volume, I think there is almost like 50 poets. Do you know how many poets did you
I think there are
anthologize?
49 poets.
How many?
49 poets in
49.
this one.
And what about the second one?
Oh gosh, the second one maybe 54, 55.
So it's a large number of poets.
Yeah. The first one is primarily the poets in and around Leimert Park. Of that, so from the first era, we actually have waves. We have like 3 like waves, you know, kind of like the Surrealists waves, you know, that kind of a thing. But I think the first wave is 1990 to like 2000, and then the second wave would be from 2000. I mean, even though I was there on the cusp, it was kind of when I became a real poet, a good poet, or a good enough poet, I guess I'll say. 2000 to 2015. And then there's a kind of a third wave of people who came up. It's really, okay, we say came up, but who became regular attendees of the Anansi Writers Workshop. And so this book actually came from a birthday party that I had.
Oh.
I invited a ton of artists to a birthday party in a really small apartment in Playa del Rey where I lived. And it was one of those nights at my house, and just a beautiful, I'm so expressive when I talk about the poetry, but the creativity was just visceral.
Yeah.
And one of my friends, the publisher, Elias Wandimu, the publisher of the book, was there. And so when he was leaving, he was like, "Where can I get this?" And I'm like, "Well, we don't have an anthology." He said, "But no." And so I was pushing him out the door because he was the last one. He was like, "I need this." And I was like, "What?" So then we kept talking about it, and finally, I was the person to pull this together. And it was a 4-year project.
Yes, out of war.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it was 4 years. Yeah. And the other one, I think the one that was published in 2017, incorporated gentrification. So it was, there are white poets in there. There is a Japanese poet in there, a couple of Japanese poets there. Of course, the African-American Chicana poets are in there as well. But it was who now lives here? Like, what does it look like? What does the landscape of Leimert Park look like now? And so that's what we were trying to capture.
Why don't you read one of the poems from this anthology?
Oh, sure. Her body was an unbraided reed in his hands. Each spore envious of the breath he whistled into the others. Her slender arms, pleasure weary from his tongue and fingers wading through her, trembled, and she opened her throat to him, vibrating like a double-reeded oboe, undone, splayed on the henna shoal. Licking his bottom lip, he blew kisses into her veins, plucked silver water bugs from the moss that had woven itself into her blades. Each time he touched her, stealing her fiber with each salty bite and pinch, she wanted to joke with him about the dangers of too much beauty, hoard her moisture, warn him of the river reed within the ocean he was unfurling. But underwater, his mouth already sticky with her gauze, the quiet bubbles rising, wind wrapped around their eyes, she let him have the last solo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also in 2017, you published Equipoise, Poems from God's Country.
Yes.
This is a very, I don't know how to describe it, this is a very expansive book in a way.
Yeah.
Also very collective. You take voices from everywhere, from Egypt, Greece, Mary Magdalene appears here big
Joseph's
time.
Mary,
Yes. Also, there's a woman in a bus.
Yes.
And also your aunt, Yemenia, your aunt appears.
Yes. Oh, I have to say too, I love that you said that. Yemenia is an Ife deity. She's an Orisha.
Oh.
So I call her, a lot of us call her our aunt or our mother, or, that's where we go pray, the ocean of Yemenia or the church of Yemenia. And so I just heard the blessing come down, like, yay, he said that. So I will say that for me, as a Black Indian woman, I have practiced the traditions of Africanism, So to the best of my ability, I've tried to reclaim what my African ancestors, what I thought that they had or possessed in a way that helped me live my life in America. So the Ife religion was one of those pieces, and I've always said I have an Orisha who helps me. Oh. And you have different Orishas at different times of your life. So Oshun was a goddess or an Orisha who helped me at one point. She was the flirt. And then Oya was a goddess who helped me, or an Orisha who helped me at one time, and she is the thunder bringer. She is the one who, the lightning, all the storms, she's the one who pierces the truth of things. And then Yemenia is kind of the gentle mother,
Okay.
Yeah, so yes. say it. So it does encompass this book. Equipoise is, I call it the book that talks about goddess iconography across the ages. Yeah.
And also with this, I call it this cosmogony in a way.
Yeah.
With
I like that.
There's also a very personal statements.
Yeah.
For example, you say, I don't want a liar on my nipples, someone breathing insincerity into my skin. But you go from these big statements and, as I say, this cosmogony approach to a very private universe. Right. Was it difficult to combine that kind of friction?
No. It's so interesting to be born into a society as a, who calls it? I forget who calls it that. Oh, James Baldwin.
Oh, James Baldwin.
He says, the three knocks against you for him was being born Black, being a man, a Black man in America, and being gay. Yeah. And a British interviewer had said that. He said, oh my God, you must be suffering. And James Baldwin said, no, I hit the jackpot, right? And so I was like, I hit the jackpot, as a woman, and I'm able to write these kinds of poems from my own experience and then look at other women's experiences and look at goddesses' experiences and reinterpret what that means.
Some of the poems also in this book, poems for Goddess Country, are ekphrastic poems.
Yes.
And one of them is a response to an artwork by a Lakota artist.
Yes.
And the name of the poem is Maka.
Yes. So I wanted to incorporate one of the American Indian deities in the book as well. I actually have a couple of ceremonial poems I have a bunch of ceremonial poems. But I'll go ahead and read this poem, which is an ekphrastic poem, a poem written in response to Colleen Kotchal's The Pregnant Grandfather piece of artwork, which is gorgeous. So I wrote this poem to kind of language it, I guess I'll say. I am half corn moon. I am half rock dream. I am half hawk bear, half Wolverine cougar. I sing to the rock people because they started it, a humming in their fire bones. I am half peyote sweat. I am half barn owl turtle. I am half prayer crier, half earth's cry. My wings are decorated with night prayers. The sun bites his tongue when I dance. I am shovels in the dark. I am half seed river. I am half mother daughter. I am half father son. A child song and her drum. Her grandmother's beaded necklace around her wrist. I am the people's daughter, the people's son. When left to myself, I grow strong.
In 2019, you published your memoir, Black Indian.
Yes.
You describe this book as a prayer for your family. Mm-hmm. It's a very intense memoir.
Yeah.
It's a memoir of violence, abuse, alcoholism, rape, racism, intra-racism. But at the same time, one of the things you say is, my family was ritualless. We practiced the ritual of violence.
Yeah.
But then with all this violence, you also keep the poet alive. Many of the sentences are, I see history as a lesson with teeth, for example. And then at the end of the memoir, you say, as we drove, our city skin peeled off and shed by the roadside in the dust. Yeah. So there's this poet blended with the memoir. Were you aware of that, the power of the poet? Did you have to tame the poet to write the memoir, or did you have to kind of infuse the poet to write the memoir?
Both. It's both. It's like, stop. So my journalism teacher would say, you have poet mouth. Like you can't write, you have poet mouth. Like you can't actually write a real, like a straight who, what, when, where, why sentence. And I was like, I can do that. And then a couple of people, when I was shopping this around a couple of years ago, they were like, it's so imagistic. How can we get to the story? And then my editor at Wayne State University Press, Annie she said, this is such a beautiful book and we want to publish it. And I thought, like, you got past all that poetry, like all of the images. And so for me, this is kind of how I think. I think in images. I think walk and talk in layers. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not good with similes, like or as. Like, I'm not good like that. But as a writer, I'm very good with kind of the recreation of a moment in an image.
Yeah.
That's a forte for me. And then also, the thing that I want to impart in my writing is how can I write so they remember this? Like, how can I write a thing so it becomes a part of the reader's own cultural imagination? And so I have heard that from a couple of people, like, this is so image heavy, this is so imagistic. It was hard for me to get through. And then other people say, oh my God, I love the way that you wrote this.
There are a couple of things I want to ask you about this book. One is the reader is right there in the middle of every scene from the beginning. I think you have an ability with, it's like a sensory ability to, because the reader, we feel the heat, we feel the sweat, the noise. And in many of the scenes, you are the witness, you are in the middle of them. Yes. But in many scenes, you are not a witness. But in both cases, even though if the speaker is present or not, the reader is totally there. So could you talk a little bit about the research process and the documenting while writing Black Indian?
I went to the National Archives in DC. I have gone to county registrar's offices across the country. I've interviewed family members. I have gone into so many spaces where I'm like opening up books that have been dusty for years and just kind of coughing, like, oh, and there's my family, and there are the plots that they owned, or there's the progression of their ethnicity. And, Ancestry.com has been another resource for me. But I will say that the first thing that I did, or that I used, were the pictures. So the first thing was looking at the pictures and wondering, like, what was your life like before and after that moment? What was happening right there? And in one of the chapters, when I segue into the past, my mom's past, it represents a picture. It was taken in 1952, and they were about to leave. My mom and her sisters, my grandfather and grandmother, had lived on a farm in Mattawan, Michigan, which had been in our family for over 100 years. It was his mom's farm, which his mom was the daughter of Willis Roberts Jr., who was some of the first free people of color to settle in that area. And Willis Roberts Jr. was the son of one of the other Roberts, who was one of the first free people of color families to settle in Indiana. So, like, that's our history. That moment in the picture is when he was going to not necessarily rent out the farm, but he decided to kind of go to the city for a job. So he took the girls and his wife to to Lansing, I think, and kind of everything unraveled from that moment. But that picture was like, for me, that was the first piece of research. Like, what happened here? And I kept asking questions of my family around that picture. Like, what happened here? What happened here? And then I would research a little bit, like, what was happening in 1952?
It was very difficult to select one section. I think with a poetry book, it's easier to select a poem because they are more confined. But with the memoir, and it's a big text, so
it's huge. When I got it, I was like, oh my God, this is like, it's big.
So I have selected one page in the last section of the memoir.
After years of resenting blood quantum discrimination, The DNA blood count police. I finally spit in the tube. From my matrilineal line, my DNA says I have a 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th generation full-blood American Indian ancestor from 1700s to 1790s, so less than 4%. The kit also says I have over 50% African and over 30% British and Irish, with a full-blood Ashkenazi Jewish ancestor on the tree. But no one called us Jewish, Irish, or British, although my great-great-grandmother was a Mahoney. Growing up, while my mother told me we were French, German, white, Indian, and a little bit of black, it turned out the order was mixed up for me, especially being my father's daughter. But no record I ever came across said we were Jewish. And I never saw or met a full-blood, white blood relative. My family records for race include colored, mulatto, multiracial, white, Delaware, Pequot Indian, Cherokee Indian born in Oklahoma, Freeman, black. I lived and identified with who I saw at family reunions, in pictures, from the darkest on my father's side, black and Mississippi Choctaw by family lore, to the crisp, light bright on my mother's side. But we were still all labeled black. How was that possible? One reason, this country punished, fined, or jailed interracial couples like the Lovings. It would not be legal to marry interracially in Virginia until 1967. I was born a year later. In the 1800s, magistrates confiscated and bonded out mixed race children as workhorses. Historically, mixed peoples were not allowed to claim or acknowledge white or Indian blood publicly, even though it was quiet as kept. These are the struggles that many of my friends who celebrate their African American and American Indian heritage find themselves in time and time again, no matter where they are in the world. They'll call us black because of the one-drop rule. They will never call us white. No one wants to call us Black Indian until we make them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I really appreciate it.